So I've been in the trade union movement for over 50 years, actually, 40 of those years in the maritime industry. And I retired from the longshore industry this last year, but not from the class struggle. I've been very active around the Longview longshore struggle, which I think most of you are familiar with. The main point I want to make tonight, well, let me preface it by saying that I want to dedicate my remarks to an old comrade of mine who taught me the ropes in the Longshore Union, Howard Keylor. Howard retired just before I came into the industry, but through working with him, I learned in a very practical and real way how to fight the bureaucracy and how to put forward class struggle demands so that it's understandable to workers and to recruit them to class struggle actions. And so the one that was most obvious to me in working with Howard, one of the first ones, was around the anti-apartheid action in San Francisco in 1984. And it was that action, we actually shut down the ship for 11 days. I was in another division of the Longshore Union, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. I was in the Inland Boatmen's Union at the time. But the Longshore Division had shut down the ship for 11 days in solidarity with the black workers in South Africa that were struggling against apartheid. And Howard played a leading role in that. It was his motion at the union meeting that the action was based on, and Howard was out there day and night organizing on the line to make sure that longshoremen adhered to the discipline of the membership, which was to refuse to work the South African cargo. And it was Nelson Mandela who said in 1990, after he was freed from jail, he did a world tour. I don't know if he came here to Canada, but he was in Oakland at the Oakland Coliseum. And he said it was that action by the Longshore Union that reignited the anti-apartheid movement in the United States. So it's that kind of exemplary work that Howard did that I wanted to dedicate my remarks to. My main point this evening is that there is a class war in capitalist society, whether it's in Canada, the United States, or any other part of the world. The problem is, for decades now, it's been pretty much one-sided. And here in Canada, I think recently the city workers took a really bad concessionary contract. Caterpillar in London closed up, and Stelco, after 11-month lockout, the workers there were terribly set back, and it looks, without any kind of serious challenge, that they're going to close the plant completely. And so this is endemic of what's happening around the world. Workers have been on the defense. There is a reason for that, and that's because there's not a class struggle leadership in the trade unions that's willing to make the kind of fight, an international fight, to beat back these corporations. And so what I want to do with that is show you this clip of the work that I was involved in with Howard Keylor in large part in the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay, and it was mainly through the Longshore Union that we were able to achieve these kinds of victories. Small victories, limited victories, but significant in the sense that it can show workers how to beat the employers based on a class struggle program. So, Gordon, can you run this clip? It's a short video, and let's see what it is.
To hell with the laws, to hell with the injunctions. Right on. I believe that that's what's necessary.
This is more than just another demonstration. This is a challenge to our system of free enterprise. Here you have millions of dollars worth of goods on a ship back there, And people here saying that if you do business with South Africa, you can't do it here.
This money is made off the most extreme exploitation of the black people in South Africa. Families are divided, people are being pushed out. It's like if you were in California and people were pushed out on the Mojave Desert and put in tin shacks with no way to grow food and no way to live, and they die. Every minute in South Africa, a child under 5, on the average, dies of starvation.
I've been aboard this ship 3 times, and I'll work any other. Matter of fact, I was in the gang that discharged the Australian cargo. We have no quarrel with the people of Australia. We have no quarrel with Ned Lloyd Lines. We have a quarrel with the South African government.
It's got the blood of the courageous youth in Soweto that stood up against the vicious, racist apartheid regime.
Of this administration of this city, we're passing paper resolutions against apartheid and then using the police force to remove people and workers who are trying to strike an economic blow against that regime.
It was a Longshore courage in deliberately violating the Taft-Hartley law and the union contract that made that successful.
2,000 longshoremen walked off the job at 11 this morning. The walkout was quiet enough, but by mid-afternoon there was an angry protest. Rita Williams reports.
As they left their jobs, several hundred longshoremen gathered here at the port of Redwood City and set up a picket line. The Inland Boatmen's Union is on strike against Crowley Maritime, the owner of the barge here at the port. In sympathy with the boatmen, longshoremen have agreed not to unload any of Crowley's barges. That's why they got upset when members of other unions, you can see in this shot, started working longshoremen's jobs unloading cans of pineapples. About mid-afternoon today, longshoremen could stand it no more, and they stormed the barge. Some stopped along the way to pick up sticks and rocks, even sledgehammers.
The scabs aren't going to work this barge. That's all there is to it. Our jobs, our lives, and everything else is on the line. This will stop any job.
Port officials called police, and the stevedores kept moving. It looked like a scene from On the Waterfront. By the time the longshoremen reached the barge, no workers were in sight. So some of the longshoremen took out their wrath on a tire and the truck the containers were loaded onto. Crowley Maritime official told us the whole action today was illegal, that it was a secondary boycott.
Everything's fine.
Was it worth it? No comment.
They come out with a flimsy excuse by saying it's the product of the union, the law. We know. We've been outside the law for 12 months. The law says we must cross the picket line. We didn't cross the picket line.
What I'm saying to you is, don't insult the intelligence of the working class.
It will be every docker in every port around the world, so that Mercy Dock and Harbor Company must understand that their cargo may be loaded here by scabs, but it will not be unloaded in any port in the world. Won't take no more. Won't take no more.
Are we ready to fight?
Damn right. Are we ready to fight?
Damn right.
When a ship came in from Thamesport, which was a port that was administered by Mercy Docks and Harbor, when it came into the port of Oakland, labor activists in this port put up a picket line, and longshoremen dispatched to the job saw the signs that called for longshoremen not to work the ship in solidarity with the Liverpool dock workers.
The arbitrator have ruled that it was a bona fide health and safety. We can't cross because of the health and safety reasons. Okay?
1, 2, 3, 4. Don't go through that terminal door. 5, 6, 7, 8. Not until they reinstate.
You're a litter bug. It's not a process server. You don't serve shit. You're a litter bug. Litter bug. Litter bug. Litter bug.
500 men sacked for refusing to ever cross a picket line. Voices down the ages warning, never cross a picket line. You must never cross a picket line.
That the global economy will not run without the consent of the workers. And we don't just mean longshore workers, but workers everywhere in this country and around the world. When the ILWU boycotted cargo from El Salvador and apartheid South Africa, when we would not work scab grapes from the California Valley or cross picket lines in support of the fired Liverpool dockers, these were concrete expressions of our understanding that the interests of working people transcend national and local boundaries. But what they have in mind for us is a race to the bottom, dismantling our protective laws wherever they find us weak. That they want to pit workers from one country against the workers of another, to erase all of our protections and standards in an international corporate feeding frenzy in which workers are not just on the menu, we're the main course. We will not cooperate.
As a gesture of solidarity, dock workers closed down freight shipments at ports up and down the West Coast.
The normally bustling and noisy Port of Oakland fell silent at 10 this morning as members of 2 longshore workers locals walked off the job. The people who operate the equipment and the clerks who keep track of the movement of containers took off after their 10 o'clock break. Meantime, in San Francisco, other members of the Longshore Workers Union took their message to the Embarcadero and the public. It was a protest aimed at the World Trade Organization. In a press release, International Union President Brian McWilliams explained it this way: by taking time out from work to voice our concerns, the ILWU is telling the transnational corporations that they cannot run the global economy without the workers of the world. Some 9,600 union members in 3 dozen West Coast ports were expected to take part in today's actions.
Dock workers say Saturday's a big overtime day to move tons of goods that come through ports. And they say nothing was moved on the day shift today. Instead, longshore workers, labor leaders, and social activists made a 2-hour march through San Francisco to protest and try to stop the execution of Mumia Abu-Jamal, convicted of killing a Philadelphia police officer 18 years ago.
I think people are recognizing that what we're experiencing really is a crisis in democracy. It's not only about Mumia Abu-Jamal, it's about a prison system that is larger and larger and that focuses on punishment for profit.
Dock workers say today's the day to come here instead of going to work. But stop work rallies affect all 22 ports along the West Coast.
Whether you're Chicano, Native American, we got to do...
Another rally in Philadelphia drew more than 3,000 people, some from as far away as France.
What we want to tell the workers in Pennsylvania is that what the Longshore Union is doing out here in California, they can do in Pennsylvania and save the life of Mumia Abu-Jamal. If the black transit workers in Philadelphia and the bus drivers and the steel workers in Pittsburgh decided that this is an important case, as we have decided, then it's in their power to stop the death machine.
Policemen them shooting these rubber bullets.
Oh, they were shooting rubber bullets?
Oh, yeah, they hit a lot of guys with rubber bullets.
Rubber bullets, bean bags.
Bean bags.
And you asked did anybody get bitten in the nose, but they definitely got beaten.
So they beat up a lot of people.
They beat some people.
Yeah,
and,
I was one of the ones that beat them real bad.
We felt that they did it without cause, we were provoked and by them putting sticks on you.
Oh, and then they had a helicopter with you?
Yes, they did.
They had helicopters.
We felt that this was something that we simply could not stand by and watch happen in South Carolina, because over the last 40 years, the workers in South Carolina, the longshore workers, had worked very hard and very diligently to build the standards that we enjoy, because in South Carolina, the opportunities for the blue-collar workers are not that great.
Yeah, free the Charleston Fire! Yeah, free the Charleston Fire! Yeah, free the Charleston Fire! Yeah.
Open the door for them and let them out. Thank you so much.
I'm going to Charleston and miss my miss.
20 years we're working this with the same container vessel, and they just come in, they decided they feel as though
they're going to take it away from us, one non-union company. And we had to retaliate. I feel as though if I have to do what I'd done before, I'll do it again.
Longshoreman affects 29 major Pacific ports from Vancouver to San Diego. At issue here, pensions, benefits, and new technology such as sensors and cameras that could eliminate union jobs. If this situation persists, store shelves could be emptied, production lines shut down at a cost of an estimated $1 billion a day.
Hey, the battle's going to be tomorrow at the cruise ship when they're going to have non-union guys unloading the cruise ship.
Hey.
What do we want? When do we want it?
Nations fight. I was fed stories as a small child of Harry and my father and Jimmy and my mother. This is our fight. My brother's here, Nick, people that I've grown up with, this is our fight. What is this fight? This is a hell of a fight we're looking at, and I'll tell you why. George Bush, ever since Ronald Reagan, they created the theater. They've got the biggest diversion theater going on right now. It's called the Iraqi War. Let's divert the American people from understanding what they're trying to do on planet Earth, which is eliminate any power control and respect for people in this world that work, that deserve to have rights, to provide for their families.
When you take on the ILWU, you're taking on the whole labor movement. The whole labor movement has not only been united, we're going to be even more so to put together our material to get the message out there so they will never try this trick again of using that lockout against good, hard-working people.
It ain't no secret. We the ones do the work down here. These are our jobs. And I'll be damned if you're gonna take it from me. I will lock your ass out.
Workers can stop it. Workers for profit. Workers can stop it. Workers for profit. Workers on fire. What is it?
I got hit by fucking tear gas.
Oh, man.
Tell them all to get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
How you doing?
They just arrested me. Okay. All right? Let them know that...
What did they arrest you for?
I don't know. They haven't told me.
Officer, can you say what you...
Here's the evidence. That's the evidence. Where the guys got shot back here, the two Longshore.
Did you arrest him for having this job?
No.
What was he arrested for?
I don't even know. He doesn't. Nobody knows. They just do whatever they want.
We've taken on the employer. We've taken on the police, and we're going to have to end up taking on the Homeland Security apparatus. Because this union, above all other unions, understands the nature of struggle. We know for a fact that the employer does not love us. Never have. George Bush Jr. proved that he doesn't love us when he interfered or tried to interfere in our negotiations a few years back. And what we saw up in Sacramento was just a continuation of that struggle. It's sad to say that in all of the years that I have been going to demonstrations, I don't see any international officers out here this morning. I'm going to say it plain and simple. This union has always been bottom up, never top down, never top down. you keep that in mind, brothers and sisters. These kinds of things have to be organized at the rank and file level sometimes. Because if you don't, you'll become subject to what we call business unionists, who view themselves as CEOs rather than workers.
The reason we took the time to come out and join you in this action is because we get it. We've been there. We know what this is all about. One thing is certain, if we struggle, we will not be struggling in vain, because many who may be coming behind us will live better lives because we dared to struggle. So once again, here we are, on the line, struggling for justice. Justice for Jason Ruffin. Justice for Aaron Harrison. The charges against these hard-working Americans must be dropped now.
Workers' rights, to oppose the war, bring home the troops, stand up for what you believe in. That's what we got going on, and I can't say it no better than that.
We all know about the struggle in the 1800s for the 8-hour day, which was a very important struggle. It was a struggle for safety, it was a struggle for survival, and it was a struggle for working conditions here in the United States. Here in the United States, workers have been struggling a long time, and it seems like now, brothers and sisters, we're struggling harder than ever.
I asked the New York Times reporter last week, will you be covering this event? And he said, is it newsworthy? What do you say? Is it newsworthy?
Stop the war now! Stop the war now! Union time! Union time! Union time! Come on, guys! Hey! Stop the truck! Stop the truck! Like me! Stop the truck! Stop the truck! We have people lying down.
If longshoremen decide they're not going to cross the picket line, then the Zim ship that's coming in is not going to be worked. And that's going to be repeated around the world in Norway, Sweden, South Africa.
One-day protest is not enough. I mean, we have to have a continued fight, a direction to go in, you know, like some type of workers' party with a connection to fight up here. Labor unions only can do so much without a political force.
Today, what you witnessed was the current young membership of ILWU Local 10 answering the call. We claim no easy victories and tell no lies. Solidarity to the Palestinians. Solidarity to the working class around the world. Solidarity to the brothers and sisters here. What is important for everyone to understand today, this is not just a rally of protest. This is a rally of resistance. We have stopped the movement of international cargo today. Yes. The port of Oakland is shut down. The port of San Francisco is shut down. The port of Richmond is shut down. The port of Benicia is shut down. The port of Redwood City is shut down. That's the power of the working class.
Proud to say that mine union in particular, this Local 10, still does some of the things that the old school labor movement used to do.
We shut down every port on the West Coast to commemorate the martyrs, the labor martyrs that died during the 1934 maritime strike. And that holiday is celebrated every year because 2 police shot strikers in the back. They shot him in the back in cold blood, and that's what provoked the general strike in San Francisco.
No matter what the outcome of that sentencing, we've still got work to do. Because not only do we want justice for Oscar Grant and his family, we want justice for us too. They're getting ready to do things with that army base. We want jobs. We want union jobs. We want living wage jobs. We want jobs for residents of West Oakland. I'm going to say it again. We want jobs for residents of West Oakland. We want jobs for ex-offenders. We want jobs for our youth. That's what this is all about. An injury to one is an injury to all.
Okay, well that's a little bit of 25 years of class struggle in the Longshore Union in the San Francisco Bay Area. You know, one snippet that wasn't in there that I'd love to have had recorded, but it never made it, was in the first, one of the first clips, right after the anti-apartheid action, there was a 1987 strike against Crowley Maritime. And without the support of Howard working on the executive board in Local 10, we wouldn't have been able to have that militant action. You may have remembered the scene with the stocky black guy up there with the sledgehammer saying, "This will stop any action. This will stop any scab." Anyway, what happened in that situation was the union bureaucrats were in there negotiating with the port to get the scabs out of there, and they said, "Don't worry, by noon they'll all be out of there." Noon came and they were still working, and we'd had enough. So Howard was standing next to me. I grabbed the bullhorn. We're at the front gate. I said, "All right, men, let's go in. Let's get them off the barge." And so 500 strong, we marched in there. The cops had their guns loaded, but there were about 500 of us, and they knew they couldn't stop us. So no one was shot, but we just kept marching. The scabs saw us on the barge, and they went jumping off the barge. They got into a van, a security guard van had pulled up alongside the barge. They all jumped into it, and we kept steadily marching at them. Howard and I were up front, along with some others in the Longshore Union. And when we got to the barge, the van took off. He couldn't come out the front gate because there were 500 of us coming down that main street. So they went off the side and tried to get out the back gate, but the back gate was locked. And the security guard didn't know what the hell to do because we were steadily marching after them. They knew we were going to take care of business if we got our hands on them. And so what happened was finally we got about 100 feet away from the van, and the security guard floored it, hit the accelerator, and just crashed through the cyclone fence to get away. Well, the scabs never came back again. And you know, when you talk about class struggle, the basic line in class struggle is the picket line. And the scabs learned a lesson that day. They never came back. And it was working with the Longshore Union that the boatmen were able to successfully organize that action. In the long run, actually, the boatmen lost the struggle because it was a concessionary contract that union bureaucrats cooked up after 9 months out on strike. But it was actions like that that if we had been able to replicate in other ports on the West Coast, we would have won. So I want to go into a little bit of my history and how I came to become a member of the Longshore Union. But before that, before I was a longshoreman, I was actually a seaman on the East Coast. I was in the National Maritime Union, and I was recruited to become a member of the Militant Solidarity Caucus of the National Maritime Union, which was initiated by the then revolutionary Spartacus League. And we based our program on the full transitional program that Trotsky developed. I don't know if, I imagine many of you have seen or read the transitional program, but for those of you that haven't, it's basically a
program that bridges the immediate felt needs of the workers to ultimately to the need for a revolution, because even basic needs of workers, like the plants here that are being closed, are not going to be met under capitalism. We need to have our own system, and that's socialism. So that's basically what the what the transitional program is. It's an attempt to share the available work, put the onus on the employer, on the capitalist, and unite workers behind these demands for struggle. The big difference between the National Maritime Union on the East Coast, which I was in for about 12 years, and the International Longshore Union, Longshore and Warehouse Union on the West Coast, is oceans of difference. It's not just the two coasts. The National Maritime Union, during the McCarthy period, the leadership of the NMU, which had been close to the Communist Party, capitulated. They caved in and actually became informers for the government, fingering communists in the National Maritime Union, some of whom were deported, others just simply lost their seamen's papers, which you needed to work. And so the entire leadership of the National Maritime Union was gutted. Ferdinand Smith was one of the leaders. He was a black seaman from Jamaica. And the way the government got rid of him was they simply deported him to Jamaica. He was probably one of the best orators. Now, keep in mind, the National Maritime Union in the 40s now, the McCarthy period began around 47. At that point, there were around 100,000 members of the National Maritime Union. It was the largest maritime union in the United States. But it became gutted, and with the passing of Taft-Hartley, which screened communists from the trade unions, communists in the leadership, you could not be a communist or a red and be an official of a union. It outlawed mass picketing, it banned solidarity strikes, and it monitored all the financial dealings of unions. So it was government control, capitalist government control of the workers' movement, of the trade unions. The opposite happened on the West Coast. In the Longshore Union, the West Coast Longshore Union, Harry Bridges was the leader. He was a migrant worker from Australia that had been an anarcho-syndicalist, a wobbly, early on when he first became a seaman. And then, in his own words, he said what inspired him most when he was a young man was the Bolshevik Revolution. That workers, Russian workers, could make a revolution and actually run a country themselves. And he changed from being an anarcho-syndicalist to a communist. But it was for that very reason that the government went after him. They went after anybody who was a leftist. And so they attempted 4 times to deport Harry Bridges back to Australia. But each time the union fought it and was successful because they knew what was behind Harry Bridges was that if they attempted to deport him, the entire West Coast, every port would have been shut down in defense of the president of that union. And so even in the midst, in the darkest days of the anti-communist witch hunts, the ILWU held strong. In fact, we became a haven for a lot of the unions. The most militant section of the American unions at that point were the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. And they were pretty much decimated. And the leaders of many of those unions, particularly the maritime unions, came and sought a safe haven in the ILWU. So it was very different when I worked as a seaman in the National Maritime Union, as an oppositionist, and working in the ILWU. The anti-communism was still pervasive in the National Maritime Union. The trade union bureaucrats were super patriotic. They ran the union with a tight fist, and getting your point across at union meetings was very difficult. Nevertheless, we ran a program. We built a caucus around the transitional program. A small, hardcore group of seamen that we recruited around demands of sharing the available work on the ship. Rather than job trusting and have a few people have all the jobs, we wanted to share it all. We demanded that they reduce the amount of hours that you work on a ship from an 8-hour shift to a 6-hour shift, which would have meant additional employment. This was implementing the transitional program, 30 hours work for 40 hours paid. That was the equivalent on the ship. We took demands like that all the way up to and including nationalizing the maritime industry under workers' control. And we were seen as the Reds in the union, the radicals, and even though there was still a residue of anti-communism in the union, we managed in 1978 to poll a little over 10% of the vote, which was pretty damn good, considering we didn't have access to all the ports all around the country, and particularly in the Panama Canal. So we were able to successfully, a number of times, challenge the trade union bureaucrats. I remember once there was a contract struggle in, I believe it was 1978, in which the largest port was New York. And intervening at the meeting, we were actually able to defeat the trade union bureaucrats and got a no vote on the contract, although they manipulated the vote and turned it the other way. But the point being that even a small core of committed class struggle militants can win over a majority of workers in a given time, even in a reactionary union like that. Now, it was a breath of fresh air to go to the West Coast and work within the ILWU. That kind of anti-communism was not prevalent in the union, and in fact, what was held in high esteem was the 34 strike that was shown briefly in the video, where longshoremen up and down the West Coast shut down every port in the fight for a union hiring hall, which in the midst of the Depression was a very radical demand because so many people were out of work, and the idea was to make work available on a democratic rotational basis so that everybody had a chance to work. And it took the prerogative of employment, that, in other words, the sole discretion of who got hired was not in the hands of the employers. It would be in the hands of the workers. That was a radical, revolutionary idea back then. And there were strikes up and down the West Coast of the United States, and 6 of the strikers were killed. 2 in San Francisco, and that led to the general strike in San Francisco in 1934. And it's that kind of history that resonates still today in the Longshore Union. And other workers in other unions look to us, and even the unorganized look to us. So while I was never able to organize a caucus within the Longshore Union, I did cut my teeth on the class struggle politics within the NMU. And we were able to organize effective actions. Like you saw, the 1987 strike against Crowley Maritime. But the transitional program also encompasses a broader class struggle. It's not just about bread and butter trade union issues. And so we always fought for the right of minorities, for immigrant workers, and so forth. At one point in the in our union, well, just recently, there was since the beginning of the Iraq War, there's been an intense buildup of the security apparatus in the United States. So what that has meant for workers in the port, in the maritime ministry, is this new identification card. Back during the McCarthy period, they tried to do the same thing, but the union fought it successfully. The present leadership in the ILWU are strictly business unionists. They're not leftists by any stretch of the imagination. And they simply complied with the government edicts about all maritime workers have to have this transport workers identification credential, a TWIC card as they call it. Well, we had a couple of young black longshoremen that went to the port near San Francisco. There were several ports, one of which is Sacramento. And they went to go to work in the port there. Well, we knew in San Francisco that all you need to do to get to work is you just flash your card and you go into the port. Well, here's two black workers going to work in an area that's racist and conservative. The Delta in California is reminiscent of the Delta in Mississippi. And so these security guards demanded that these two black longshoremen open up the trunk. Well, we don't open up the trunks of our cars. Is that what you call it here, trunks or boots? I don't know. I know in England they say boots. But anyway, they called the business agent in San Francisco and said, do we have to do this? And the business agent said, no, you don't have to do that. But before they could get off the phone, they called security, and the police came. They put him in handcuffs and then sprayed him with mace. That's the kind of sadistic police brutality that young black longshoremen have faced with. So we organized a major campaign to defend them. The international bureaucrats were hands off. They weren't supporting it at all. But we understood, like the builders of the union back in the 30s, that fighting for the union is more than just fighting for your economic demands. You have to look at the class as a whole. The reason we won the 34 strike is that the leaders of the Longshore Union went particularly to the black community because they knew that the employers would try to use blacks to break the strike. So they went to the black community and they said, listen, if you honor our picket lines, we will guarantee you that the workforce will be integrated, that you will have jobs on the San Francisco waterfront. That, probably more than anything else, was the essential ingredient that united the working class on the waterfront that won that strike. And so we still remember that today. And we waged this tremendous campaign for the two young brothers. We were able to get one of them, the charges dropped. Had the officers on top, the international officers, got behind us on this, we could have won this thing. But it showed our membership that, you don't have to always do whatever the police tell you to do. Because it's becoming more and more like a police state. And I'm sure in this country, too, you're losing your civil liberties. And that's the role that class struggle militants can play in the trade unions. I think you saw the picture of Oscar Grant. He was a young black man who was, actually he was a butcher's apprentice. He worked in the supermarket just around the corner from where I live. My wife recognized him, I didn't, from the TV pictures. And she said, geez, that's the young man that works at the Farmer supermarket. And what happened was he was coming back New Year's Eve on the subway station, on the platform, with some friends of his. And the cops just surrounded them, and they pulled out his gun. It was all videotaped because kids, everyone now has the telephones that have videos on them, and it was all over the news media. It was all over the internet. The cop simply pulled his gun and shot the kid in the back, lying down. He wasn't moving, and it provoked rioting in Oakland. And so we took it to our union, and we said to the members, listen, this is how the 34 strike, the general strike, was provoked. Cops shot 2 of the strikers in the back. This young black man was doing nothing wrong, and he got shot in the back and killed. Well, his family was invited to come and address our union meeting, and it was a very emotional meeting. And we voted to shut down all the ports in the Bay Area to demand justice for the young man's family. But these are some of the kinds of struggles that we were engaged in. So Howard for many years fought the bridges bureaucracy, and one of the big issues that he fought we're still shackled with today, which was the steady man system, which means that in 34 people died for the union hiring hole, which meant all the jobs were rotated. But what happened in 61 is Bridges, the former militant, he was one of the leaders of the 34 strike, and he needs to be given credit for that. But what he did in 61 was agree to the employer's demand for a steady man system, which meant that they could hire who they wanted, a certain amount of workers for steady for that one company, and they wouldn't be rotated through the hiring hall. It was a preferential system. And so, Howard and others fought against that. That fight was led in the fight against it was led in 71. There was finally a strike against it, and it was led by Trotskyists and other militants. One of the leaders of the 1934 Teamsters strike in Minneapolis ended up becoming a militant in the Longshore Union. He was one of those, John Maloney, who was a strong militant opponent of the steady man system. And there was Asher Harrer, who was a leading light of the Socialist Workers' Party. He was also an opponent of that. And Howard was just beginning to, feel his oats in the Union, and actually that's how he came to Trotskyism, was through meeting Asher Harrer, and they signed a leaflet against this steady man system. Well, we're still faced with that today. Howard was part of a caucus that was initiated by the Spartacist League in 1978. There was a strike in the Mojave Desert. The Longshore Union is more than just longshoremen. It's warehousemen, it's hotel workers in Hawaii, it's fishermen in Alaska, and we have miners in the Mojave Desert. And Howard and the Militant Caucus that put out the Longshore Warehouse Militant advocated for a strike by longshoremen to honor the picket lines. To have boron miners put up picket lines, which wasn't being done. Unfortunately, the Bridges leadership opposed that. The strike was defeated. And just a couple of years ago, we had a very similar situation with the boron miners. Now, you have a Rio Tinto operation here in Canada. Rio Tinto is international. The union bureaucracy tried to wage a big publicity campaign. The union bureaucrats looked to do everything but class struggle. So they'll do a PR campaign. They'll say, write letters to your congressman. They go to shareholders meetings. They do everything but occupy the plants or set up picket lines. That's real class struggle. And so just a couple of years ago, they had this big PR campaign, which is, they had a big caravan to go from the docks to the desert. And we put out a leaflet, some militants and myself in the Longshore Union, saying, well, that caravan's heading in the wrong direction, because the power of the Longshore Union is to stop boron products from being shipped. And so the picket lines should be on the ships to stop the cargo from going to market. And so we called for the miners to put up picket lines on the docks. The international leadership would not allow them to put up picket lines on the docks. Longshoremen just kept working these scab cargoes. They put up picket lines out in the desert, in which the union was way outnumbered by police forces and state police and so forth. So that the scab containers were steadily going to the dock and being shipped out. Longshoremen were working it because there were no picket lines on the dock. After several months, the union bureaucrats claimed a victory, but it was not a victory. It was a sham victory. The lockout was over. Boron had locked the miners out, but they won nothing. The scabs were still in the mines. Their seniority was gutted, and the new workers that came into the mines didn't have defined pensions. They only had these, what we call 401k, privatized pension plans that they have to pay in themselves. So the reason I mention that is because right now we are faced with one of the hugest struggles we faced in decades in the United States, and it's in a small port in Longview, Washington. And the significance of this particular struggle is that EGT, Export Grain Terminal, is a multinational conglomerate that is saying we don't have to hire longshoremen. Longshoremen have worked the docks on the West Coast for 80 years, and particularly in grain. And this company was throwing down the gauntlet and saying, no, we're going to hire who we want to. And so they hired non-union at first, but then there was a big uproar in the community about that, so they hired scabs from operating engineers to do the work. The Local 21, the Longview Longshoremen, were really very, very militant. What they did was wage the kind of struggle that workers did back in the 30s and 40s. They went out, they blocked trains, grain trains coming in. The police came in and beat them up, arrested them. They went in, the longshoremen went into the EGC facility, they occupied it, they dumped grain, all these kinds of militant tactics. And still, what they managed to do was inspire workers across the country. On September 7th of last year, they blocked a train. They had the international president come down. And just a funny little anecdote was the international president was standing in the back. All the longshoremen were up in front blocking the train. So one of the younger militants said, "What are you doing in the back? Get up here. You're the leader. You're supposed to be leading us." So the president comes up. He says, "You mean up here?" He says, yeah, up here. He said, "Now what's going to happen is you see the cops out there. They're going to probably arrest you. But we are 500 strong. I think there were 700 actually. And we're going to demand that they release you." And that's exactly the scenario that played out. So the cops came, they arrested the president, the cameras were flashing, oh my God, this heroic Union president being arrested. And longshoremen surrounded him, and he was released. Of course, that made it all over the news media that the president of the Union was arrested and so forth. And so the next day, longshoremen from all the major ports in the Northwest converged on Longview, which is just a small port on the Columbia River. And therefore, the ports of Portland, Seattle, Tacoma, all the major ports in the West Coast were shut down because everybody was protesting there. Well, that scared the hell out of the union officials. Because it's one thing for a union bureaucrat to stand in front of the cameras and get arrested. It's another thing when all the ports are shut down, because then the employers raise hell that what are you doing? What are you doing? You got a contract, you got a legal obligation to have your workers be loading and unloading our ships. And this is where Taft-Hartley comes in. Fundamental understanding of the class nature of the state. During the anti-communist period, during the witch hunts of the 40s, the most anti-labor legislation, we call it the slave labor bill, the Taft-Hartley bill, that prevented mass strikes, solidarity strikes, was being threatened by the employer. And it scared the hell out of the union officials, because we'd already been fined about $300,000 for militant actions. Then with legal fees and so forth, it was like about $1 million. And that scares union officials. But even more than that was the fact that they couldn't control the ranks who were going around shutting down the ports. So around, what was it? I guess November 2nd, what happened was there was Occupy, the Occupy movement, the populists, youth, militant, they don't like the police. In fact, they had a demonstration recently in Oakland, death to capitalism and long live the Oakland Commune. So they're not exactly liberals. There's a strong anarchist influence in the Occupy movement. And they called a general strike on November 2nd. Why? Because a week earlier, the police had attacked the Occupy encampment in front of Oakland City Hall. And one of the bloodiest scenes was an Iraq veteran, a young man by the name of Scott Olson, who'd done 2 tours in Iraq, was brutally attacked by the police. You saw the video of the one longshoreman that got hit by a tear gas canister. Scott Olson, he got hit in the hand, and that white thing sticking out of his hand was his bone. But Scott Olson got hit in the head by the tear gas canister, and it could have killed him, because that's exactly what killed one of the strikers in Seattle in 1934. And those images were shown all over the television. So a week later, when the Occupy movement called for a general strike, of course it wasn't a general strike. It wasn't workers voting and deciding that they're going to shut down the city. But nevertheless, the sentiment was there for a mass protest against this kind of police brutality, and in solidarity with the Longview struggle, and in solidarity with port truckers, mostly immigrant workers, who were trying to organize a union. And it was successful beyond anyone's imagination. There were 30,000 or more people who marched into the port. That never happened ever in the history of the maritime unions in this country. 30,000 people marching into the port. And I know that's fairly accurate, because one of the people who was doing the counting was a member of the Inland Boatmen's Union, whose job it is on ships, on the ferry boats that run across San Francisco Bay, is to count passengers as they go on the ship. So he's counting the waves as they kept coming into the port, clicking it off, And Occupy claims it was 100,000 people that came into the port. I think that's high, but I think 30,000 is probably accurate. 30 to 40,000 people. It was immense. It scared the hell out of the capitalists, the city government, the bankers, the shippers. It was way beyond anyone's expectation that that kind of thing could happen. You probably saw these images on TV here in Canada. But it scared the hell out of the union bureaucrats, too, because they themselves had never organized militant job actions before. So the union bureaucrats started putting out literature to the membership saying, you know, this Occupy movement, we believe in their goals about the bankers and all this stuff on Wall Street, but not in our backyard or on our docks. We are the ones that decide what happens on the docks. And so that kind of propaganda was being put out by the union bureaucrats. Dan Kaufman, the president of the Longshore Union in Longview, came down. He was invited down to Oakland. And he spoke at our union meeting, and he also went to one of these general assemblies by Occupy. And there, he's standing next to me, and we're watching the proceedings going on. And all of a sudden, there's a proposal that comes up that says, we're going to shut down all the ports on the West Coast in solidarity with the Longview Longshoremen on December 12th, and with the port truckers. It's the first I'd heard of it. And it's the first that Dan had heard of it. So I turned to Dan and I said, what do you think of this, Dan? Is this going to work? December 12th? Where do they come up with that date? He said, well, he thought about it for a second. He said, you know, that ship, the first grain ship, is supposed to come in about 4 days after that. So the timing might just be right. This would be a shot across the bow. It would give a warning to EGT that what's in store for them if that ship comes in. And so I said, oh, okay, well, if you think it'll work, I'm for it. And so we put the word out that to support December 16th. Well, the union bureaucrats were on the opposite trajectory. You know, one of the best documents ever written on the role of the trade union bureaucracy is by Trotsky and Trade Unions in the Epic of Imperialist Decay. And let me just see if I have this in front of me. Yeah. So, monopoly capitalism is less and less willing to reconcile itself to the independence of trade unions. It demands of the reformist bureaucracy, trade union bureaucracy, and the labor bureaucracy who pick the crumbs from its banquet tables, that they become transformed into its political police before the eyes of the working class. And it couldn't have been said more succinctly, because that's exactly what the ILWU leadership did. They put out a letter on January 3rd to all the locals, and it said, yeah, the ship is coming in. The date was moved back from December 16th to January 3rd. What happened on the 16th was amazing, which is why this letter was put out. So let me back up a second and say, so on the 16th, the union officials were saying, cross the Occupy picket lines. We're the ones who control the docks. Don't let Occupy tell us what to do. But they also said that the democratic process of the Longshore Union was being usurped by Occupy. Well, we, rank and file militants, put out a leaflet through the Transport Workers Solidarity Committee, which wasn't exactly a class struggle caucus, but it's a group of militants in the transport, mostly in ILWU, and we said, you know, we never had a democratic vote in the Longshore Union on whether to honor these picket lines or what we were going to do exactly to fight against EGT. However, on December 16th, the rank and file did vote with their feet in Seattle, in Portland, in Tacoma, in Longview, in Oakland, and we honored the picket line of Occupy, shut down all of these ports. And that's really, I think, what scared the hell out of EGT and the port bosses, because they realized, wait a minute, these trade union bureaucrats that are supposed to be the police for us, they're not very effective. And the ports were actually shut down. So we're going to have a problem here when this ship comes in, because the bureaucrats aren't going to be able to control the ranks. So they put out another letter, and this time tried to be a little bit more sophisticated, and he said, well, yeah, we want people to come up to Longview when the ship comes in. That's like in the first paragraph. But every paragraph after that refers in the most deferential way to bourgeois order. They refer to federal labor law, the Taft-Hartley Act, the NLRB, the federal judge who was complaining that he was being treated by a paper tiger by these longshoremen. They wouldn't listen to his injunctions. They were defying his injunctions. This is the letter that was put out, and the incredible thing is, and the clincher is here. The last line on the first page from the president of the union said, a call for a protest of EGT is not a call for a shutdown of West Coast ports and must not result in one. Well, you know, Longview is a relatively small port, and it's essential to stop the ship when it came in. But the ultimate power of the Longshore Union in the capitalist system is to shut down global shipping. That's the power that longshoremen have in this whole nexus of world trade. And of course, this is what he was, the president of the ILWU, was intent on stopping. Funny thing is, when the president of the Longview local was in Oakland and we had a march, he was marching with his local union banner that says ILWU Local 21. We had a larger banner that says, shut down all West Coast shipping in all the West Coast ports in solidarity with Longview. The opposite of what the class collaborationist leadership was saying. So what's interesting and what this letter exposes is that many on the reformist left, from the ISO, the International Socialist Organization, SWP, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Spartacist League, the Workers' World Party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, all of them backed what the union bureaucrats were saying, that we can only basically do what the union bureaucracy is saying. That's where they were taking their orders from. And the long and short of it is that it's the obligation of people who consider themselves revolutionary, their organizations revolutionary, to challenge the capitalist system. And the main tool within the working class that props up the capitalist system is the trade union bureaucracy. And it was incredible that these left groups capitulated to that kind of pressure. Long and short of it is that the president, the governor of Washington realized that with the elections coming up for president, excuse me, that the fact that there was so much publicity given to the state of Washington was going to do everything possible to make sure that this grain ship got loaded. It was reaching a peak. The grain ship was coming in the first week in February. State police agencies were lined up, the local police were lined up. The federal government had the Coast Guard coming in with armed Coast Guard cutter to protect this grain ship coming in. They had helicopters. They were using every means possible to suppress the workers' right to protest. And finally, the governors realized that the union had said over and over again, the rank and file workers, and by the way, many of them were women. They were arrested 3 and 4 times. Shelley Porter, for one, was arrested in her house in front of her daughter. You know, it was a police state in this little town of Longview. When I was there, they had police circling the union hall during the union meeting. If you were wearing an ILWU shirt walking down the street, they just arrest you. All sorts of intimidation. So the governor of Washington realized these people are committed. Like they said, we have no option. We have got to win this. If we don't win this, we have no jobs. And so it would have been a bloodbath. So the governor, Gregoire of Washington, called on EGT and the ILWU bureaucrats to sit down at the table and work out a deal. And in short order, there was a deal worked out. But that deal was so concessionary that it was never even shown to the rank and file. They haven't voted on it yet. But the union paper has called it a significant victory. And many of the left papers of some of the organizations I mentioned previously are going along with the same line. The union fought for jurisdiction, but it's the sole discretion of the employer to hire whoever they want at this facility through the union hall. If they fire somebody, they can hire anybody they want that's not ILWU. That's not what jurisdiction is about. It completely eviscerates the union hiring hall. And so to say that this was a successful battle to defend jurisdiction is simply not true. It's not true. And so where it's at now is the union bureaucrats are parading this around as a victory. We're calling for a caucus, which is a democratically elected body of delegates from all the ports to meet and vote on it and decide on this. And it needs to be voted on by the rank and file. It's always been voted on by the rank and file in each port. It's not being done this time. So there's a lot to be sorted out here. My one big shortcoming, having been in the Longshore Union, is that I was never able to consolidate, to build a rank and file caucus based on a class struggle program. Some of the militants, the young black guys that you saw in the video, were around for the various actions that took place. But to sit down and do serious work to actually build a caucus is not an easy thing. If we had a caucus in the union today, we could be leading a struggle against the bureaucrats. That doesn't exist. But we are able to put out our propaganda, and we're hoping that there will be a caucus in the near future so that we could fight it out. But barring that, what is needed still is to build a class struggle caucus based on the transitional program to oust the bureaucracy, because it's not just in the ILWU, but it's in these trade unions all across the country and in Canada as well, that collaborate with the employers, that don't believe it's possible for workers to win, But we believe, on the contrary, if you saw the video clip of 25 years of struggle, that in these battles, if we have the right leadership with the right program, workers can win these class wars. And let me just leave you with that. Thank you very much.